Welcome to this week's edition of Outdoors Online, a weekly webcast produced by the North Dakota Game and Fish Department. I'm your host, Mike Anderson. We're going to continue our series of regional fishing previews this week, but first we just want to remind viewers the North Dakota Outdoors is open, and we encourage you to get outside and fish or take a hike in our wide open spaces. And when you do, please practice the recommendations for minimizing the spread of the COVID-19 virus. Avoid areas that are already crowded and keep a minimum of 6 feet between you and others. Fishing season is open year-round in North Dakota, and if you're headed out in the near future, you'll need a new fishing license starting April 1st. If you're looking for a good place to fish, here's this week's previews. My first guest this week is North Central District Supervisor Jason Lee. Jason, you manage Lake Audubon along with all the North Central District lakes. Let's focus on walleye populations in Lake Audubon first.
The walleye population is doing fine. We do a summer netting survey on Audubon each year, and our catch last summer was right around the long-term average. The fish that showed up in our survey were mainly 14 to 20 inches as far as keeper-size fish, so that's what anglers can expect to catch for walleyes.
Okay, let's move on to northern pike in Lake Audubon.
Yeah, we don't have a high-density population of northern pike in Audubon. But there's some bigger fish in Audubon, and anglers typically try to target those in the spring.
One species in Lake Audubon, and I had the privilege of going out and fishing for these last year, was smallmouth bass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we do have a lot of smallmouth bass in Lake Audubon with a wide range of sizes and some nice fish that are a lot of fun to catch, like you say.
Mm-hmm. And it would be a great fish species for somebody who is just getting into fishing also.
Right. They're fairly easy to catch, and you can even sight fish for them sometimes.
Okay, let's move on to muskie.
Yeah, we've been stocking muskie in Lake Audubon now for 10 consecutive years. So we're getting to have some pretty good sized muskie in Audubon. Like the pike, they're a low density population. There's not a lot of them, but if you're just looking for something different to chase, muskie would be a good option.
Jason, let's move on to your district lakes. North Central has a lot of good fishing lakes, walleye lakes.
Sure. Some of the lakes where we had good walleye catch during our netting survey last summer were Long and Loon Lake in Bottineau County, Antelope, Clear Lake, Hinch Lake, Cottonwood, New Johns, Brush, Brecken and Holmes, and then Hiddenwood Lake all showed pretty good numbers of walleye.
Okay, let's talk about pike.
Sure. For pike, some of our better catches were in Long Lake in Bottineau County, Long and McLean, Crooked Lake, Gertie, Rice, Makoti, and North Carlson.
How about panfish in your North Central District lakes?
Yeah, bluegill up in Lake Metagoshi is always a popular spot. For other panfish, bluegill and crappie in Nelson Lake down by Center.
Okay, and you have largemouth bass in Nelson Lake also.
We do, yeah. That's a popular, well, we really don't have many lakes at all in the North Central District with largemouth bass, but that is one that is a popular spot for that. It's a unique lake in that it has a powerhouse on it, and the water is warmer year-round than our other lakes, so the warm water fish like largemouth bass and crappie and bluegill do really well in that lake.
Okay, had a lot of moisture last fall. How are the water levels in district lakes?
The record precip, late summer, early fall, almost all of our lakes are either full or near full. And one of the benefits, potential benefits of that this upcoming spring is that with the higher water, we flooded shoreline vegetation. And species like perch and northern pike will use that flooded vegetation and reproduce naturally in the lake. So there's potential this spring for good perch natural reproduction.
A lot of great information, Jason. Thank you.
You bet.
Joining me now is Southeast Fisheries District Supervisor BJ Kratz. BJ, just like every other district, a year ago your lakes were losing water. Last fall we had a lot of moisture. How are things looking?
Well, they're looking really well. We've got actually over the winter, lakes have been coming up all winter long. In fact, we've seen in a lot of situations, the lifting of ice even throughout the winter. And now with the runoff we're getting, they're coming up even more. So we've gained 2 to 5 feet over last year, which means good things for fish, and not just for, you know, spawning and so forth, but also for production of little creatures that they eat, which translates into better growth rates for the fish. Perch and pike particularly benefit from newly inundated vegetation. When they lay their egg masses on it, they typically require something a little fresher that gets flooded rather than the old stuff that's been underwater for a long time. So that should translate into some pretty good production in the future.
Let's move into your fish populations. You talked a little perch and pike, but let's move into your walleye populations on your district lakes. How are they looking?
Right. Well, I think, as I say every year, things are good and they continually get better. Now, this year's no exception. You know, with the new charge of water we've got, a lot of the lakes that we've started way back when, as well as the ones we're just coming online, are getting better and better. So we've got a lot of walleye opportunity out there. By far more opportunity than we've ever had in the history of the game and fish in the state, in the Southeast District. We've got a good lake, for example, is Craft Slough. You know, that one has a phenomenal population of walleye. It seems like it continually, goes up, and we've got the 2013 age class is really good, and they're now 3-pounders, and they're dominant. Another one is Twin Lakes. That's another one that continually impresses me, that it seems like our catch rates and so forth continually go up every time we sample it, even though that gets a fair amount of effort at times. And we're looking at about a 16-inch average for a walleye in that lake. So a lot of good walleye opportunities.
Okay, let's move into northern pike populations.
Yep. Pike are one of those species that are very, they respond well to newly, like I had stated earlier, flooded vegetation and so forth, and the more water that comes into a system, typically they will naturally reproduce. And so last year was pretty good. We picked up a lot of small, pike in our early sampling in the summer, so they had a pretty good spawn last year. This year's not going to be any different. I think in a lot of our lakes we'll have another good spawn, but a couple of good pike lakes are Twin Lake, again, like even for walleyes, but that one consistently has natural reproduction. It's really fairly static in terms of a good stable pike population. There are some nice fish in there, and there's good numbers of them. Another one that might be worth checking out is pipestem. We did have that winter kill last year, and it was severe. It killed a lot of the fish, but the pike kind of held on to that, and we had really high catches of young of the year pike last early season. So they had a good spawn last spring. They don't grow. They probably grow 12 inches or so the first year, but there's still some adults in there, and folks weren't able to fish it this winter, so kind of got a break there. Both Jamestown and Pipestem are closed this winter for recreational activity in general. So.
Okay, speaking of Jamestown, Pipestem, let's move into panfish.
Sure. Let's
talk crappies.
Yep. Well, unfortunately, when Pipestem killed last winter, we lost the crappie population. So they don't exist for the most part in that lake anymore, but Jamestown's still crazy numbers. I expect a really good year this year. Like I had just stated, it was closed for folks this winter, so there were a lot of fish that didn't get taken out that normally would have, but they'll be ready to go in May. That's a really popular thing down here in the reservoir because you can catch them offshore. And in fact, when the water's right and clear, you can see your fish, and it's really a fun thing. Every year I see more and more kids down there enjoying that sight component of fishing, which is kind of neat to see.
So it's a great species to go after if you've never fished, or if you know somebody who's never fished.
It is, and there's a lot of it's not atypical to go down there and catch 50 to 100 fish in an afternoon. So I mean they're abundant.
Well, BJ, do you guys have any plans to do anything with Pipestem as far as crappies?
Sure. Well, last year we stocked a few out of Jamestown into Pipestem to try to jumpstart it. I didn't want to do too many because we do that crappie assessment each year in the lakes, and obviously I wanted to see what the impact of that winter kill was. So if we were to stock a bunch, we wouldn't have been able to say. But I expect to do the same this year. In fact, all of the crappie that I have netted during our crappie assessment we've taken on to Jamestown the last several years, and put them into some new waters to try to start new crappie fisheries, and also to supplement some existing populations that aren't doing so well. But interestingly, on Jamestown, the crappies grow really rapid for the first 3 or 4 years, and then it's typically 1 or 2 age classes, and then when they get to be that 8-9 inches, they really slow down because there's just almost too many of them. So it's good to take a few out, start some new fisheries, and this year won't be any different. We'll do the same thing.
Okay. Like you mentioned, things are setting up to be pretty decent for perch reproduction.
Right.
How are perch populations in the southeast?
Perch populations in general have, we've got a few lakes that were hot this winter, and it seems like every winter that we have, a few lakes that people find with water movement moves fish, and a lot of times we may not stock a particular lake, but they do get fish one way or another, and sometimes they're off the grid and we don't know where these places pop up, and there's folks that find them, and word travels fast. But like I had mentioned earlier, we're in a pretty good situation for some good perch reproduction and a good forage production to support the perch that are there to grow them better, get some bigger perch again, hopefully.
Okay, I know one fish species that you like to target,
Yeah.
And has become somewhat popular over the last couple of years, smallmouth bass. How are smallmouth bass populations?
They're doing really well. We've got a couple hot lakes, and Spiritwood Lake, for example, has always been a good smallmouth lake for, well, I shouldn't say always, but the last 15 to 20 years it's been pretty good. But Ashtabula, the last 5 years has really blossomed into a smallmouth fishery. We were able to sample that now every year and kind of get an index. We're still developing that because we hadn't done it much. In terms of bass sampling, it's a little different technique to do that. But great population over there. We see more and more use every year, and I think people are catching on to how fun they are, and particularly in May and June, you can really catch some, make some hay with smallmouth bass. And then another thing I was talking about Ashtabula is the muskies over there. That's a unique opportunity for folks to maybe catch a muskie. It's not, they're not 50 inches yet, but I've had a lot of reports of folks catching 30-inch fish out there and so forth. So that's a unique opportunity for folks to potentially enjoy too, is the muskie fishery there, not just in the reservoir, Ashtabula, but below the dam in the Cheyenne River as well.
Speaking of Lake Ashtabula, nice bluegill population Lake Ashtabula as
right.
well.
Last year, it seemed like we had a lot of reports from anglers, catching some really nice 8 to 10 inch bluegills out of Ashtabula, and we did, in fact, some of our recon for the zebra mussel thing that has taken, hold over there. We did see a lot of areas that were utilized by bluegills for spawning, and we could see fish too with the camera and so forth. So there is a good bluegill population over there right now, and they're nice sized fish too. You might have to look a little bit to find them. They're not super abundant, but when you do, and that can be really great in May because those fish are shallow, typically like crappies, and you can cash in on that shoreline activity rather than, you don't need a boat to catch bluegills and crappies, at least in May and most of June. So
last year, zebra mussels were found in Lake Ashtabula. How's that going to affect the fishery or fishing?
Right. Well, that's a good question. We don't really know yet. Obviously, it's the first infested inland water body that we have in North Dakota. Of course, the Red River we found them there several years ago, but initially we had to report, and I think it was May, of an angler catching what looked to be like a funny-looking clam, so to speak, and further investigation revealed that indeed it was a zebra mussel. So that basically we went over there and kind of did a bunch of recon, and we didn't find high densities of zebra mussels anywhere particularly, but we did find them, and they were randomly spread out through the lower half of the reservoir primarily. And as summer progressed, it did seem like the population was expanding fairly rapidly, but like I said, we don't really know what it's going to do with the fishery. There's a lot of unknowns in this situation, and we'll just have to keep monitoring it and I guess do what we can to make sure that we keep them there and nowhere else.
A lot of great information, BJ. Thank you.
Thank you.
Remember, starting April 1st, you need a new fishing license. And to find out all the rules and regulations, pick up a North Dakota 2020 to 2022 fishing guide. You can also view those regulations on the Game and Fish Department's website at gf.nd.gov. For BJ Kratz, Jason Lee, and the rest of the staff here at the Game and Fish Department, thanks for joining us for this week's Outdoors Online. We'll see you again next week.